One of the defining features of underwater kicking is the motion of the hips. But just because the hips are moving, that doesn't mean that they should be the focus for fast underwater kicking. Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. As we've been talking about in this series of videos, their hips are moving in each and every stroke. However, it's important to differentiate cause and effect. Just because the hips are moving and because the hip movement is important for fast swimming, it doesn't mean that the hips should be the focus of what swimmers are doing. In many cases, the hips are moving because of other actions that are taking place in the stroke, and when that happens, the hips move naturally as opposed to trying to force them into certain positions at certain times. And just like every other stroke, it's just as true with underwater kicking. Well, the hips are moving and they are allowing for force transfer down the body into the feet. That's not necessarily where the movement is happening. And so if swimmers try to move their hips independent of what's happening within the rest of their body, they're going to struggle to create as much speed as possible. Let's check it out. The key concept that we're going to explore is that the hips, while they are moving and their movement is important for creating speed underwater, their movement simply represents a midway point. That motion is going to start further up the kick, and it's going to transfer down the kick in order to create speed. So if we watch this swimmer here, what we'll see is we'll pay attention to the upper body and the hands here. So right here, it's going to dip down, and that's going to cause that wave that you can see is traveling down the body, and that's what's facilitating the movement of the hips rather than just simply moving the hips up and down or back and forth. It's the wave that travels down the body and then ends up snapping through with the kick right there. And so the wave starts at the top, goes through the shoulders, goes through the hips, goes through the feet. And so that is what's going to create propulsion, not simply moving the hips back and forth, because if that just happens, there's no connection to the upper body and there's likely to be less connection to the lower body. And so if swimmers can start to move and undulate, starting with their upper body, somewhere between the chest and even up towards the hands, depending on the swimmer, that's going to create a wave of undulation that travels down the body. It moves through the hips, and then it travels down into the feet, and the feet are ultimately what are going to apply pressure to the water, which is going to move the swimmer forward. So again, the hips do matter, but just focusing on the hips probably isn't going to get the job done because the hips are moving in concert with what's happening up top, further in the upper body, and then the hip movement is also connected to what's happening further down in the body. So it's really, really, really important for swimmers to, rather than focus on their hips, focus on creating a wave of undulation that is going to start higher up in the body, travel down the body, travel through the hips, and then that's going to allow them to create a lot more propulsion with the feet. As we look through several swimmers here, what we'll notice is that they're going to use different ranges of motion in their upper body. That's not quite as important as the fact that the undulation starts there. Regardless of the range of motion that they do use, what we'll see is if you pay attention to the hands, they're moving a little bit and the feet are moving a lot. And so as the wave travels down the body, the range of motion becomes bigger and bigger. So the hands are moving more than the head, the ribs, the torso is moving more than the hips are moving more than the thighs, and the feet are moving more than anything else. And that allows swimmers at the end of that kick to create a lot of foot speed, a big range of motion, and that's what's going to allow them to create a lot of propulsion. And so that wave has to travel all the way down. If there's just a focus on the hips, then swimmers aren't going to connect everything and they're not going to swim nearly as fast underwater as they otherwise could. So if we watch another swimmer here, we're going to see the same thing, not using nearly as much range of motion in the upper body, but you can still see that small wave, and then you can see it start to get bigger, and you can see the hip movement connected to the upper body and the hip movement connected to the feet. And so that wave is traveling all the way down the body. That's allowing for a faster, snappier kick, which is going to help swimmers create a lot more propulsion, which is ultimately what we need if they want to go fast. So just like the previous swimmer, you can still see the hands are moving. There's still that wave that travels down the body. It's going to start a little bit smaller here. It's still going to get just as big, and it's going to have to travel all the way through down the body. If there's just a focus on the hips, you're not going to get nearly the connection. You're not going to get that whole wave. You're not going to get that final snap. And so swimmers have to learn where to start it from and how to connect it in order to create as much speed as possible. Now, if we look at our next swimmer here, you can see it a little bit tighter than, again, the first swimmer, probably a little bit bigger than the second swimmer. And so you can see the hands are moving. That's where that wave's happening. And so the hands dip down, right there, and then the wave kind of travels down. You can see the hips move, the feet snap through, and then the wave reverses, and then it's coming back up, and then that whole wave traveling down the body, traveling through the hips. So rather than focusing on the hips, we get the wave moving, the wave traveling down the body, and that's what's going to create speed rather than just focusing on the hips. And so swimmers are going to be able to move their hips if they want to, and that will create some motion, some speed, but when it's connected, they're going to be able to create a lot more force, a lot more power, and they're going to be able to create a lot more speed. So what's really important is that everything is connected. It starts up top. It's the wave of undulation that travels down. It gets bigger and faster as swimmers go, and the more that they can execute that skill, the more they're going to be able to create a lot more speed when they kick underwater. If you want to learn more about how to create the stability in the upper body necessary to generate that wave of undulation, check out the video here. And if you want to learn how to help swimmers develop the rhythm necessary to let the undulation flow down the body, check out the video here.